This is very interesting. I am past the start of showtime. The stream is connected. The station didn't buy into the software. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be, is not happening because there's no connection status between what's on the computer and what's on my ability for the computer to be connected. So technical difficulties abound here, and I don't have any idea what the technical difficulty is because everything on my side says it's working properly. So I'm going to reboot into the station, no connection. Okay, that's what the problem is. Okay, I got to reboot everything. Hang on. And I had the connection earlier today when it started. So this is really most annoying. And it'll be about 5 minutes before I have everything on the go.
I got a little blurb here about the Schumann resonance if anybody wants to hear it.
Sure, we've got 5 minutes.
I'm having trouble getting the thing up here and being able to talk to you at the same time. Give me a minute.
Hey Lee, where did you post the other options for the second?
They'll be in the radio clubhouse chat.
It won't let me bring it up in time, but basically there's three signals, three frequencies that make up the Schumann resonance. And it's read in microfilm.
That's how they do it. So it's like a double, two frequencies, then there's the frequency in between, which creates the third one.
Right, there's three of them. And if you look at that graph, that green and white graph that they were showing, right to left is time, up and down is the frequency. Now, the amplitude or the intensity, I think, is the color, how it changes color is how, that's the intensity. But the level that it goes down, those little green bars you see, those are different frequency notches. So the taller it is, the higher the frequency, and the brighter it is the more intensity. That's the way I thought, I took it to be. And it seemed to make sense the more I looked at that.
Yeah, that's how I read it too. It took me a while because I was looking at the amplitude graphs instead, which kind of made it a little bit more obvious because it's like a line graph, but it took me a while to work out how to read it because I wasn't used to seeing information conveyed in that format before.
Yeah,
Is there hertz connected to the Schumann frequency? Like an average?
It's in hertz. It's 7.4 something. It shows you on that picture I just posted what the main resonance frequency is. And it's like a waveguide around the Earth. I don't know if you guys are into RF propagation or know anything about that, but every cavity has a resonant frequency. You imagine a waveguide is a square tube. They use it in radar, and they use that to get the signal from the amplifier, from the actual instrument to the antenna. And instead of a wire, they use a square tube, and it's called a waveguide. And the size of that tube determines the frequency of the antenna that they're broadcasting on. Well, the Earth forms the same thing from the planet of the Earth, the soil, to the ionosphere, creates a waveguide. And that's where that 7.8 hertz comes from. That's the frequency of the resonance of that waveguide. It's really weird how it works, and it's initiated by lightning and other things that, as these three things they show you in that photograph, those are the basic three things that make up the human resonance. But lightning is a big thing. And what I thought that was really weird about that is if you follow the thunderstorms, you can go to these websites, give you counts of lightning strikes per hour or whatever. And then you go to the Schumann resonance, it doesn't seem to correlate directly to the lightning. But yet they say that the lightning is what is the main cause of the Schumann resonance. It's really confusing. I think they're hiding a lot from us about what the Schumann resonance really is.
Can you play that again now that I'm back, that I can hear it? I'm still having computer programming problems, and I'm going to have to reboot again. I've now gone into black screen, and I have no idea why. Now I got colored screen again, but yeah, play that again. It's going to be 5 more minutes till I can get on.
I can hit the rewind button, but it probably ain't going to be the same.
Oh,
Okay.
it was fine.
Well, okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I want to let everybody know that this is Freely. I changed my name last night to make it match with all my other websites. I got them. Everything's on Stubblenut. So Freely is an old name from when I was a gamer, and it goes way back in my younger days. That was one of my nicknames in the bar was George P. Freely. I had a habit when I got drunk and blacked out. I like to piss on pool tables, so that's how I got the name.
Man, what a moniker, bro. That's amazing.
Okay, can I just say, I love your authenticity. You just are you, and that is like amazing. Love it.
Well, then you don't want to hear where the name Stubblenuts come from. I'll just leave that one to your imagination.
Wow. Well, that's like folklore history, bro. What you just showed with us about the pool table. I'm gonna have to put the song.
The whole name of Stubblenuts is G. Ron Stubblenuts. It was like a radio personification, but I was never on the radio. It was just I belonged to a strange group of friends, and anything was possible. Just leave it at that.
Well, you can be now.
I like that.
I think I need to go and pull People Are Strange again.
People are strange.
Yeah, that's definitely true there. But that human resonance, that's a subject that, because it does affect us so much, and most people aren't even aware of it. But if you follow that human resonance and how you feel every day, you'd be surprised the connection between the two. I noticed that I have heart palpitations when that thing goes crazy. And the more I followed it, this is the strange part. The more I followed it, the less it affected me. And you figure that out.
The awareness.
If you can be around someone that's playing in 432 of any key live, it'll change your vibe of 432. I mean, the Schumann resonance or whatever you're talking about.
Well,
what's weird about the Schumann resonance is that I need a calculated number, but it fluctuates.
Well, the 7 point, it's always going to be, the main frequency is always going to be there. It's like a wind instrument, with a reed where you blow in it and the holes are on different places. But the actual design of the instrument determines the timbre of the tone. So when you change the hole on it, you're still getting that same original timbre, but you're just overlaying it with another tone. Well, the same thing happens with Schumann resonance. It always has this 7.24, whatever the hell that number is. It always has it in there, but then it has overlays of that that can be stronger than the resonant frequency of the waveguide. You follow me?
Well, if it's a 7.24 or 7.42, that's interesting.
When the Schumann resonance fluctuates, say from 7.2 to 7.4, does that shift the other resonant frequencies that are at higher resonances that are part of the Schumann sequence?
Well, if I look at it, I always try and compare it with what I know, and what I know is waveguide theory, and so it's always going to have the resonant frequency there.
And the resonant frequency is going to change frequency from time to time, yes?
It will, because the distance between the surface of the Earth and the ionosphere does change. So it does change. But if you're looking at it globally, it's going to pretty much stay at a certain number. You know, it's not going to change that much, but it does fluctuate. But what I was trying to get at is, a waveguide operates more in multiples, like a resonant frequency, of harmonics. So that's what you're seeing is those little bands on that thing. Those are harmonics of the original. So when you look on the side, you'll be able to determine which one is the main resonance frequency of 7.2. I can't read that thing at 7.2 or 7.8, whatever it is. And then the other ones, as those bands go down, those are multiples of that frequency. That's the way I took it. And get all the way down to the bottom, it's only like 80 hertz or something. That graph doesn't cover that many, a bigger band of frequencies. It's rather small.
And I would like to know what that range is that it covers. What I'm finding is that one of the normal Schumann resonance frequencies is at 59 hertz, and that's too close to the 60 hertz of the cyclic energy frequency of what they wire American households with, so that when there are power surges, I get all sorts of fluctuations going on that I can physically feel within my body.
There's I'm sure the electrical grid has something to do with it. But that's weird because the Europeans run it on 50 cycles, right? And we run it on 60 cycles.
Yeah, and neither one is a proper resonance to interact with humanity. If humanity needs a 369 resonance, I mean that in that 432, you add up the numbers 4 plus 3 plus 2, and that gives you 9. 440, 4 plus 4 plus 0 is 8. So 440 is not a resonant frequency for humanity. 432 is.
Okay, maybe it's got something to do with, is there any other grids that operate on other than 50 and 60 cycles in the world? Are they just so?
If you look at the way things work, I think that there are ranges that things work at. And like the 5G question that everybody's furious about, that's just another set of ranges of frequency. It's just that the frequency is in such small units of vibration that it dampens out over distance, and so they have to put the power supplies all together, and the density certainly is going to mess with a lot of things that they're doing. But 4G and 3G and 2G have messed with our frequencies, and I think our frequencies are constantly being messed with.
Another way of saying that, probably, Lenny, is that when you mention 432 equals a 9, the 9 is an immutable number, and it can disappear, and still the numbers can calculate the same way. So you're right that the number 9 is has a lot to do with the way the Earth is vibrating, I think. And the 440 hertz, because it's an 8, you have to look at the infinity number, because it's infinity in a loop, but it doesn't have, it's a closed loop. It's a closed system, and that represents the matrix. So
from my experience with mathematics, probability and statistics, and just number theory, I've come to the conclusion that any whole number has to have an error bar limit of +or -1 as a minimum, so that when we talk about the number 8, that would include things from 7 through 9 in sort of a bell-shaped curve resolving with 8 as the midpoint. When you get to working in the Fibonacci sequence, where the numbers that are adjacent to each other are not necessarily next to each other, the count goes from 3 to 5 to 8 to 13 at the same time that normal counting would go from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. And so what I think is that Fibonacci can always be reduced from big numbers to small numbers, but probability and statistics requires big numbers to get the picture of everything that's possible to happen, because in the smaller the numbers you are, the more likely you're to get a single outcome. And so even with coin flipping, you're going to get heads and tails. And if you throw 5 heads in a row, the chances that you're going to get a 6th head as the next flip, by the basis of probability, are very low odds, because your 6 in a row is kind of inconceivable. But on the point of the flip, it's a 50-50 coin flip. You can get heads or tails. And I got to pop up on my computer, and we are on air. If the computer would quit throwing pop-ups on me. This is the new way on Steampunk Radio. And if you've been listening to Steampunk Radio this morning, you heard quite a bit of default music, because we had some technical problems in the studio that were not allowing us to be here. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you might be. Right now, you're on the new way on Steampunk Radio with 2 E's. I'm Dr. Lenny Thyme. We're up for the best 2 hours we've ever had of radio time, and we're going to start it by taking you into the world of the 1960s and 70s. This is Van Morrison. La 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 di da, a brown-eyed girl. Yes. We are talking about the Schumann resonance. There's a lot of things going on in the world today, and I'm just, as a scientist seeking an answer, I have the answer to life, the universe, and everything. The answer is 42. I know the mechanism of how to get to the answer. I know exactly what the answer means, but I can't explain it to anybody because nobody seems to be on a wavelength where they can relate the mathematics qualitatively to what's going on. But 42 is that age where you wake up and suddenly realize that everything was taught to you and the way that it was taught to you is completely different from the actual workings of the way it is. And it's really unfortunate that it takes 42 years to get there, but that's the way the system goes. And by next year, it might take 44 or 46 years to get there. Who knows? But 42 was the answer back when they asked the question in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They created a computer, an AI, named Deep Thought. And Deep Thought was given the question of what's the meaning of life? And Deep thought about that for millions and millions of years before coming up with the answer 42. But by the time he came up with the answer, they had forgotten what the question was. So then they asked Deep Thought, what was the original question? And Deep Thought hasn't woken up from that dream yet. So we all live in a dream state. And we're caught up in a world of deep thought. And the deeper you think, the deeper your rabbit hole has become. And we know about rabbit holes because we took one pill, and one pill makes you larger, and one pill makes you small. But the one pill mother gives you don't do anything at all. Go ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall. And if you start looking into Alice in Wonderland and the Wizard of Oz and the Matrix, they've given us all the clues for the reality that's here. They've just presented them as fiction while presenting a reality that is more fiction than any thought of fiction you've ever engaged. So right now we're sitting back and watching the news stream pass us by, and what we've got on the one hand is a lamestream media, and on the other hand, people reacting very violently to what they hear based on the narrative that the lamestream has told us. So Doc Lenny here on the New Way radio station has a way new narrative than anyone else has. And in determining how the narrative works for the Way New radio show, we have reached a point where there is a divergence in what's going on to what we understand is going on. And when there's something going on that we don't understand, we have to go, whoa, and step back and say, what did we miss? What are we not getting here? What has changed so that the reality that I am presented with now makes sense in the terms of what I understand? Now, not too long ago, there was a huge dump of information by the United States Central Intelligence Agencies. And my good friend SMQAI and Chick in the Lost and Found bin every Saturday talk about new revelations in the time of times in which we are getting releases of way more stuff from the 1980s and before that tell us about the technology they had then, which far blows away the technology that we have had introduced to us now. Enough so that it really forces us to question the narrative. But even before that happened, that CIA dump was a response to a dump by Vladimir Putin and the Russians of a KGB information trove from the 1980s that talked all about the origins of the Cold War. And I don't know about you, but I think all this stuff between the Russians and the Americans is a big put on. And if you go back to 1987, an artist named Al Stewart cut an album called Russians and Americans. And in that, he sang about how Russians and Americans both care for their children and both have perspectives on human life at human scale that are very similar to each other. And that once you get to corporate scale and country scale and other things, the difference in philosophy is totally academic. Don't the Russians love their children too? So we're not going to have a nuclear war and a massive blowout and all that. And the powers that be that are pushing us in that direction are losing it, because now we know that the history they've presented us is as much a crypto fiction as the history we present as reality here in the New Way radio show. So what we're finding is that from the Russian dump, there was a whole realm called the Empire of Tartaria, or Empire of Tartary. And the Tartarian people were peaceful people all over the world. So we on the New Way are taking the storyline that we are the descendants of the Tartarians, and we are in investigation for our own history. So I'd like to bring in a few of the Tartarians who are in the neighborhood listening in the chat. And Miles, if you would, can you give us a brief history on the rundown of Putin, the KGB release, and how we know of the Empire of Tartary?
Yeah, well, I guess the way to start this is the way you asked me from the beginning. A couple of weeks ago, you asked me, where did the meme start about Tartary? And that was a flashpoint for me because I did not know. So I was glad you asked me that. So when I asked on the Tartary, who hunts for star forts, and we'll get into that in a minute, he's found over 3,000 now. And now he's starting to realize that that where star forts are, there's always a citadel. And then we realized that, and most people probably might have already known this, but citadel and city are a wordplay. So every major city that's a city, not a town, has either a star fort or it was a citadel in Tartary. So anyway, getting back to the Putin question, the interesting thing about that was once I found out from Mike, he said, well, of course, the KGB dump. I said, what? He said, yeah, there was a big Russian document dump of all this top secret stuff for a long time, and Tartary was in it, a major portion. So I started hunting for it, and I started looking at some of the papers, and they're just like Lenny says, of course, just like the CIA, I don't know how many thousands or millions of documents. Same thing with the KGB. They did the same thing. And there's so much material that, and the way it's written, and it's also written in, Russian, so it's got to be translated. There's a lot there. It's mind boggling, actually. But what I've got out of that is that it's very interesting that you started this with the Cold War and how that, what's really there. And we know that, if the Russians were really against America, the way to propagandize Americans at that time was the moon landing. Now, whether you think it's fake or real, if it is fake, don't you think that the Russians would say, the United States pulled off something ridiculous? So getting back to Tartary, it feels like, just like you said, once the CIA made that dump and then the Russians did it, it was almost like a countermeasure of something. And why would they dump out the idea of a Tartarian empire? So we started looking into all that, and and I was already into Tartary before I found those documents. Started looking into them because I just started watching videos on YouTube because it kept coming up in my feed about Tartary, and I was going, "What in the world?" But anyway, I looked into it, and the first thing that we did to verify that this was true, we were in Dallas, Texas at the time, and we decided to go to Fair Park in Dallas, which holds where the Texas State Fair is, because we noticed in Tartary that all the supposed state and world fairs around the world that were, recognized as, that big of a fair always had Tartarian buildings that they said that they built. And sometimes these structures are so magnificent. If you look at the Chicago World Fair, before it was burnt down, it just it makes the Vatican look strange. I mean, and the Vatican is also a Tartary. So, and a star fort in and of itself. So anyway, when you look at the whole thing and then you see how far reaching it is, as far as what these people were and who they were, their Tartary was not, from what I can gather and what everybody else is looking at, as far as the maps are concerned, Tartary is not an overall empire like you would think an empire is constructed. It's an umbrella over all nations that were a part of Tartary. And this extended from Russia, as we know it now, Mongolia, China, and going west all the way around the world to Africa, everywhere on the Tartary maps and the choreography that we've seen. And the choreography, it's amazing because you can see some of these maps are all yellow around the edges of these continents. And I was thinking, okay, how far does this go? And man, it seems like it was everywhere. And the more maps that are being pulled up, because I'll scan the maps all the time that people are pulling up, and what's interesting on the Tartary on Discord, there are so many maps and so much information being poured in. It's just hard. It's just amazing to try to keep up with. So basically, Tartaria was an umbrella that extended over the plain as we know it. And we don't know how long that took or how long they were there. But it seems like the farther we dig in history, some version of Tartaria was going on. And the strange part is there's other timelines that overlap that we don't fully understand. And it's not a definitive thing at all. It's kind of dreamlike because this whole thing has been emerged. It's just emerged. And you can find Tartarian buildings in anywhere government structures are. I mean, government institutions are, libraries, a lot of them, they have just taken over. Whoever was here after the supposed mud flood between 1840 and maybe 1865. And there were previous mud floods that it looks like that were going on too. And we don't know how long those mud floods, and I need to preface this with the people that don't know about the mud floods. It seems as though Tartaria was covered in a mud flood. And all of society was recreated to look like a linear history. And they did a lot of things to make it look like that. And we all bought it until Tartaria emerged. And that's the beauty of Tartaria. I don't know where it's going, but I do know this. What we're finding is that psychologically, at least, we can all agree that Tartaria seems to be an expression of the optimal and what we've always dreamed of as a free society. And that's how beautiful it is. So, and their art, their high art, and everything is just amazing. And their technology, and their free technology that seem to span the world. And there you have it.
It seems to me that there's a lot that is going on that has to do with different simultaneous timelines, and that part of what's coming out in Tartaria is changing the timeline of the accepted history of what we have now. And the more that I see things, the more I feel that the Renaissance could easily be explained by the presence of peaceful Tartarian society, way better than it can be explained coming out of the Dark Ages, where everything was suppressed and we lived under the fear of the Spanish Inquisition. And so there's a lot going on there. Earlier, as we started the show, we were talking about a phenomenon that had to do with the stars in the sky. And a friend of mine had filmed an exploding star, but the star was exploding, every 10 seconds for about 4 minutes, and just continually in the sky. This was filmed with a level 9 phone camera, so the resolution is not very good, but you can see the colors changing, the sparkles. It all goes into a little pink sort of thing and then pops and then starts again. And you can tell that there's a lot of movement that wasn't the camera movement, but it certainly looked like something was trying to catch the attention of the observer, and it just isn't explicable in terms of what we're dealing with now. And that conversation led into a discussion of the Schumann resonances, which is what people were picking up on when we first started the show. So I'd like to have Gary mic in and pick up the conversation from what the Schumann resonances are and what we were talking about, and then I will continue from there.
Okay, I posted a video. It's only a 3-minute video, but it gives an explanation on the Schumann resonance. I think we should listen to that first.
Okay. Do you want to just pop it on?
Yep.
Sounds very, very good. I haven't been in the chat room since the show started because I've been trying to work things out. But you know how things always work. Perfect, no matter what you're doing. And so if you understand that the world is going to be what it is, somewhere in a parallel universe, we're getting exactly the same sequence of events that's leading in a slightly different direction. And there's some explanations of things that tell me that right now, two timelines are competing for our attention. And if we can continue to pay attention to the things we pay attention to, while those timelines are competing with other people for their attention, I think that we'll see that the new timeline, where we weigh things and come to agreements, is going to manifest some more people within the new way, and that the descending timelines of space wars are moving out of the system. And so, I see we have a little bit of problem here with the bot. I have no idea why the bot is having a problem, but maybe I can go and pick up what we're trying to play and play it myself, because the bot has been behaving for me.
I was just getting ready to cue it up. I was waiting for you to get done talking it, Lenny.
Okay, shoot then.
Okay, then the name of this video is what is the meaning of the term Schumann resonance and how to pronounce it?
The Schumann resonances, senior, are a set of spectrum peaks in the extremely low frequency, ELF, portion of the Earth's electromagnetic field spectrum. Schumann resonances are global electromagnetic resonances, generated and excited by lightning discharges in the cavity formed by the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. This global electromagnetic resonance phenomenon is named after physicist Winfried Otto Schumann, who predicted it mathematically in 1952. Schumann resonances occur because the space between the surface of the Earth and the conductive ionosphere acts as a closed waveguide. The limited dimensions of the Earth cause this waveguide to act as a resonant cavity for electromagnetic waves in the ELF band. The cavity is naturally excited by electric currents and lightning. Schumann resonances are the principal background in the electromagnetic spectrum beginning at 3 Hz and extending to 60 Hz, and appear as distinct peaks at extremely low frequencies, ELF, around 7.83, fundamental, 14.3, 20.8, 27.3, and 33.8 Hz. In the normal mode descriptions of Schumann resonances, the fundamental mode is a standing wave in the Earth ionosphere cavity with a wavelength equal to the circumference of the Earth. This lowest frequency and highest intensity mode of the Schumann resonance occurs at a frequency of approximately 7.83 Hz, but this frequency can vary slightly from a variety of factors, such as solar-induced perturbations to the ionosphere, which compresses the upper wall of the closed cavity. The higher resonance modes are spaced at approximately 6.5 Hz intervals, a characteristic attributed to the atmosphere's spherical geometry. The peaks exhibit a spectral width of approximately 20% on account of the damping of the respective modes in the dissipative cavity. The eighth partial lies at approximately 60 Hz. Observations of Schumann resonances have been used to track global lightning activity. Owing to the connection between lightning activity and the Earth's climate, it has been suggested that they may also be used to monitor global temperature variations and variations of water vapor in the upper troposphere. It has been speculated that extraterrestrial lightning on other planets may also be detected and studied by means of their Schumann resonance signatures. Schumann resonances have been used to study the lower ionosphere on Earth, and it has been suggested as one way to explore the lower ionosphere on celestial bodies. Effects on Schumann resonances have been reported following geomagnetic and ionospheric disturbances. More recently, discrete Schumann resonance excitations have been linked to transient luminous events, sprites, elves, jets, and other upper atmospheric lightning. A new field of interest using Schumann resonances is related to short-term earthquake prediction.
Don't do that.
Okay, there was a couple terms in there that they didn't explain. The first one I caught was ELF. They called it ELF. It's extremely low frequency band. That's what they're talking about. The other thing I caught that I wasn't aware of, I'm sure I had it in the back of my mind, but it didn't ever come to the front, was the part where he said that the waveguide, the upper ionospheric layer, is compressed by the solar activity. So that explains why the Schumann resonance is going crazy right now, because the sun isn't putting out as much energy. Therefore, our magnetic field is low and allows the solar wind to compress the ionosphere more, has more effect on it. And that throws the Schumann resonance way out of whack. It makes it go up way higher because the waveguide is becoming smaller.
Now, if this is an electrical-based phenomenon, do you suppose that throwing a whole bunch of lithium, aluminum, strontium, and barium ions into the atmosphere could be affecting Schumann resonances?
Well, it certainly would if it affects the conductivity of the air, because it's going to create more lightning. It'll create more lightning at a lower potential, though, you would think, because the conductivity of the air would increase. So maybe there's a line that, because the potential would be lower, but it's more frequent, it would kind of be the same. It'd like it work itself out. I'm not really sure about that, but I'm just thinking.
I'm thinking that there's got to be something. Why don't you take a moment and explain to listeners what waveguides are? Because as a scientist, I know what you're talking about, but my imagination using the words wave and guide and how they actually work are quite a bit different.
Okay, everything works on a resonance. That's what Tesla talked about. Well, the same thing applies to RF energy and antennas. And that's what a waveguide is. It's an antenna. A waveguide, the physical properties of the waveguide, if you take and you figure out, if you take a cross-sectional cut of it and you figure out the area of a square of that dimensions of that waveguide, that'll tell you what the frequency is of that waveguide. It's done by the cross-sectional volume, I think that's what it's called. That determines what the waveguide is. It's just a square tube that the dimensions determine the frequency that is carried down the waveguide.
Okay. So you can't alter the dimension of a waveguide once it's set, or do they have variable tuning waveguides?
Well, that's an interesting question because I don't know any reason why they would have one that would be variable. Because a radar is what they're normally used on, as a radar system, and it's set at a predetermined frequency, and it's left there. The frequency determines the reason of the radar. If it's a ground-based radar, it might be one frequency. If it's an air-based radar, it might be a different frequency. But no, the waveguides are solid normally.
Okay. Is that why radio frequency originally, when people were building radios, they had to have crystals so that the crystal could serve as a waveguide and focus the signal to a single frequency?
The crystal, they use crystal sets. They still use them today, but it's just electronically done. But a crystal gives you a exact frequency so you can stabilize the communications, so that frequency stays where it's supposed to be. That's all a crystal is. It generates, to the cut of it, it generates a particular frequency. And so that's how they start with the synthesion process to get the frequencies they want. They start with a base crystal, and then they heterodyne it up to whatever frequency they want.
They heterodyne it up? What is that?
It's hard to explain. It's been so long since I had to explain it. Heterodyning is the mixture of two frequencies to get another one. That's basically what it means. They heterodyne to modulate an amplified AM radio. That's heterodyning. They also modulate an FM signal using a different kind of heterodyne frequency. But that's all it is a mixing of two or more signals to get another signal.
Do you suppose that energy works the same way as this when it's not in the form of frequency and light?
Well, I think isn't it all just frequency and light? I mean, if you look at electricity, the only way you can look at it is actually, well, I kind of misspoke. Electricity's properties are more of water than they are light. But if you touch something electrical to a ground, it emits light. So it has kind of properties of both.
Yeah, the electromagnetism is really getting messed with by the solar minimum and the fact that there's something going on that just isn't being conceived by us, the people. And so we're doing a lot of speculating based on inadequate scientific coordination. They're hiding something, and until we get a straightforward explanation of what's being hidden, the narrative that we see is breaking down. And so I'm attempting to construct a narrative that makes sense, and the Schumann resonances have to have something to do with the production of the crop circles and other circles that we're seeing. So I want to bring on Lee now for a moment to explain what has recently happened with him in crop circles. So if you're here, Lee, can you mic in? Dum, dum, dum. Yes, you are. You're sounding very clearly. Tell us the recent story of your crop circles. So you've managed to use the cloud therapy to make communications with beings that are essentially scrying what we're doing here, correct? Would you take a moment to explain to the listeners about cloud therapy and what you're doing on YouTube? Because besides doing the cloud therapy, you're also restreaming the new way so that people who are watching the clouds on your station can also get the philosophy from our station.
Just had to check my audio as well because I realised my mic was off on the thing, and if it's not on set on to the on function via OBS, then it won't pass through. So yeah, the philosophy of cloud therapy, it's just, it started off as an art project and just a bit of simple curiosity. The Mandela effect kind of became something that I became really aware of, and then that brought me together with a number of people, and then through those experiences and my curiosity of the whole thing, I started to, very early on, maybe like 2 or 3 months in, I started looking up at the sky and noticing a lot of strange things, and it didn't really make sense to me. And then, suddenly I was opening myself up to all this esoteric, spiritual kind of knowledge and wisdom from other people that was helping me along my path as well. And so gradually, it's been piece by piece, bits of information coming in here and there that give me a little bit more of an idea of what I'm dealing with. Because, to be honest, I'm not sure this has been done before, at least in this iteration. I don't know if the technology such as this has been around prior to this civilization, but I think this is a fairly new thing. It's quite novel for them as well, perhaps, and I think that is partly the element, the novelty factor. But saying that, it's been a process of a lot of meditation and a lot of watching. I mean, thousands of hours at this point. So yeah, 2 years. I'm in my third year now, and sorry.
One of the things I really like about the channel is when you start using the geometry to cut the visual in half and lay it on itself, and the things that come out from that. The channel, which people can find on YouTube under the name Disintegral, features the cloud therapy, and it's almost daily that you're on any longer, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't. There's rarely a day that I don't do it now, unless it's a clear day or overcast. I will tend to do it almost every day now. So yeah.
Yeah, it's like a radio show where I just am so used to doing the radio show in the morning that I'll wake up on weekends and be doing the radio show for 20 minutes before I realize, oh, it's Saturday, I'm not on air.
Right. Yeah. It's a bank holiday here today, so I actually almost didn't know you had a show on because it felt like a Sunday. So I didn't. It only occurred to me literally about 10 minutes before you were due to go on air. I wanted to say though, just like your show, I found that cloud therapy has been evolving. It's become not just a curiosity, but a project involving art, science, and spirituality, and mixing it all together. And I've got a very organic process with it. I like to, I see it as more of a co-creative project than my own solo thing. So that's whoever's energy I'm working with, whether that's being here in the radio show with you guys, and doing and having that streaming over while I'm doing cloud therapy as well. I was very pleased that you were happy for me to do that, and I share a very similar outlook and ethos, and I believe the new way is a really excellent and worthy thing to invest my time and energy and trust in, and so I see it as a co-creative collaboration with as many many sovereign beings who are also co-creators like yourself and everybody here. And so it becomes like, I don't know, it's like I'm seeing myself grow through those experiences, and also just by looking outward to the sky, it's almost like a marking point, or a way of being able to see where I am at as well. And sometimes it does feel like there's a great deal of interactivity, and I think as people watch, they'll realize that there is something quite strange going on, if not in general with reality, which they should be questioning at this point, certainly with my particular stream. So, yeah.
What I think is that we're being activated into a creativity, and we're being given forums to use this creativity that are outside the previous construct. And so having the Tartarian Empire returning as a basis for overlay for the directions that we're going really seems to me to be opening up new channels for creativity. And so the idea of what's going on with the star forts, when I started talking to Mike about the idea that the star forts are on the ley lines, that maybe the activation of the heavens as by watching the sky is similar to an activation that's going on with us in terms of what human scale is.
Yeah.
And that we've been working so far off of human scale as humans that we've lost the integrity of our functions. So maybe this is just like a global reset in order to once again establish the creative human problem solver on all scales, because we've been so distracted by the fluff of human creation that we haven't been paying attention to our homework and interacting with the entire life process. Well, Karen, can I bring you on to talk a bit about the sociology of what we're figuring out as we transform from a culture based on current humanity into a culture based on unknown resonances that come from different sizes and scales?
Sure. I would say I would call it more of a biopsychosocial perspective. In social work, we learn to look at human behavior, functions, interactions, group dynamics, community dynamics, behaviors as a whole, and that they are influenced by biological factors, psychological factors, social factors, and the required addition back in 2002, spiritual factors. That said, I recently, neuroscience and neuropsychology is one of my areas of specialties and focus, especially with my interest in trauma and brain chemistry and brain the brain operation and brain what would you call it, format or whatever. And I actually sent you an article along with a couple others who I thought might be able to understand better than I did in one of my continuing neuroscience psychology type recommended readings. There was the article is about frequency. Now this test, there's only one other of its kind done in the 1980s, which really was not very telling at all, although I should probably go back and get it. And it went all the way till 2016 before somebody to conduct a psychological experiment on influence of frequency on human behavior. And let's just face it, culture is basically a reflection of human behavior. at a time in life. And when I say human behavior, please recognize that human behavior is influenced by values, uh, anything of the time, okay? So that being said, I found it very interesting that in this experiment, they were working on 3 hertz versus 60 hertz. And they found that at the lower hertz, that the way they had classified in this study and enumerated the behaviors and conduct, at the lower frequencies, there was a higher depression, higher anxiety, as evidenced by however they determined to characterize those behaviors. Which,
Well,
let me finish. What was interesting when I read that was their characterization of like high depression, high anxiety happened to be from the action of withdrawal, which is very different from how the DSM-5 actually classifies or would even measure if somebody was diagnosing and measuring intensity of depression or intensity of anxiety. Withdrawal would definitely be a form of depression, but being
you
non-part.
lost me.
Go ahead.
You
Sorry.
didn't let me get to my question, and now you've lost me with your jargon.
I'm
Come back to
sorry.
reality. What are we talking about?
Me coming back. I'm sorry. Oh gosh. Okay, so
I
this
mean, I
happened.
had to. I had to try and catch you, but when you said continue and you ran off, I lost where you were totally at. But
I'm
there's a
sorry.
problem with the frequency and that Schumann resonance thing that came on that we played.
Right.
That frequency that they threw at the end of that video blew my ears out. Whatever they
Yes.
did there was just really, really got me angry with it.
Right.
And that play on frequency to make people angry goes on all the time in this general behavior stuff.
Well, let me say that the long story short, and you have the article in your inbox to review later. I felt as if what they basically proved in this study is that frequency can create non-participation, complacency, and just being dormant and not participating. That's a real problem. If that is applied on a global scale, that's a real problem. I mean, can
Well,
you see the implications on society and culture? I mean, you asked for a sociological point of view. Can you see the implications of creating a frequency atmosphere that has been tested on? This study is from 2016. That frequency, by making people sleepy or just
okay.
complacent, what would
First
happen?
off, first off, it's bullshit. Anything cited from 2016 that's a study is completely useless science.
Which is why I should go back to the 80s one. But interesting, there's only 2 studies on it. 2.
Well, it's because it's a topic you're not allowed to push studies out on. And the whole science is not about what you're allowed to think. It's about how you're allowed to derive your thinking. And that's one of the reasons why this show is specifically against scientism. And what you've just brought up is really a good example of how scientism has gone from the hard sciences to the soft sciences and really spilled a bunch of vomit all over our understanding of things. And it is so ridiculous that they can play with the frequencies. What you just described with the frequencies in 2016 study is an explanation of television and how they use television for mind control. That's all that is. It's coming clean on stuff that they figured they better put out because someone in the future is going to look at things and they're going to find that 2016 study and cite it as something that it's not meant to be.
But keep
The
in mind that we're moving away from television, and there are other areas of exposing people to frequency outside of just what they're visually watching.
Well,
Okay, I
heck,
grew up
just
in
look at
the
what they did
19.
in that video. Just the fact that that video ended with a screeching sound got me worked up and angry.
But think about what G7 said and how he literally had to program music for CVS Pharmacy in a way that it was meant to keep lurkers away, which is basically word for teenagers that are up to no good. We don't want them sticking around, and if I have this program, this looped music at a frequency that they're less inclined to stick around, that's going to be lower theft, this, that, or whatever the assumptions are. But what about the other people that are in there and have to wait for an hour for their medication to be filled? What about the people that work there? I mean, like, what is this doing to us? And so there's a lot of confusion, and to sit there and always with social science, you can't extract one variable. There are so many, like billions and billions of factors that influence our behaviors in our communities and our groups.
Okay, time out again. We're on human scale, and what you're talking about are group behaviors from corporations that are enforcing behaviors on people.
But human is
That's not a
psychology.
mindset we even.
I get
That's a
that, but
bad mindset to be in. It
I
really
agree.
is.
But that's society. Society is more than one person.
Okay,
That's
well,
sociology.
fuck society. Fuck it all. Get rid of them. I don't care what they care about. Gary. Hey, Gary. You're mic'd in.
The waveguide thing is what I was going to get back to. I got a better description of it. If you think of a coaxial cable, I don't know if you've ever stripped one of them back, but you got an outside layer of plastic. Underneath that, you got a thin foil. Underneath that, you got a white plastic. And inside that, there's a solid copper wire. Now, disregard the outside rubber casing. That's just a protective layer. The next one underneath that is a thin foil-like shield. Can think of that as the ionosphere. The next layer is that plastic. It's called a dielectric. That's an insulator between the center conductor and the foil. The center conductor is the Earth. So now you have a perfect waveguide. The coaxial cable acts as a waveguide with RF energy. That's why different coaxial cables are set for different frequencies, because the dielectric's different. The size of it is different. Okay, now back to what she was talking about and the frequencies and stuff. If you look at a waveguide in a certain space, an area has a resonance frequency. Now you take a person's skull, the size of their skull, there's going to be a resonant frequency to that, to the bone structure, to the cavity inside your skull. If they get to that frequency, they can project a modulated signal right into your skull, and it will be detected by your brain. It'll be like somebody's talking right inside your head. That's the technology they're at right now. They can do that right now with that 5G crap. They get up in them frequencies, and the frequency is small enough that it resonates inside the cavity of the human head. That's scary. And then they want to pump it up to astronomical power ranges. Oh, we're in big trouble if they start doing this.
Yeah, the resonant frequency of humanity is 1.61, and that is tied to another resonant frequency at 3.14. And those two numbers that I'm quoting are not in hertz. They're dimensionless because they're the phi ratio and the pi ratio, and that natural systems have waveguides that move them to that frequency. And almost all the constructs of humanity that are laid upon us for control are off frequency and cause irrational vibrations that get humans angry.
You still there? I just lost the signal. You stopped.
I just stopped. It's one of
Yeah,
those
that
things where the measurement of hertz as a frequency, they Can we get it into nanometers? Does anybody know the conversion from hertz to nanometers?
Yeah, I used to know that. I don't. You could do a search on DuckDuckGo real quick and find it. I don't remember what it is. I'm supposed to know that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we have a big compartmentalization problem in that different people understand concepts completely different ways that don't overlap because of the perspective of approach. And as an electronics guy, Gary has a totally different perspective than me as a chemist guy. But I do know that resonant frequencies of different atoms arrive from transitions in the electronic state. And so those things that Venus Flytrap talked about last week, protons, neutrons, and electrons, well, chemistry is just about the electrons. And the protons and neutrons haven't mattered much until they got to nuclear chemistry. But nuclear chemistry is a whole complete diversion because they've already got 0 point energy invented and sitting in the filing cabinets of a lot of corporations who don't want to let it out because it might be bad for business.
Have they really kept it a secret though? Don't you think some of them places are actually using it?
You know, that's a good question.
Yes.
But I question what's actually going on. Go ahead, Karen.
Yes. In fact, I did research on this and actually traced back to a couple of people that ended up based on another researcher known to me that educated me that the research actually was connected to the military. And when the what do you want to call it, like the face company, which was basically a name that was like 3 times removed from the actual company that was doing it, they were violating and using frequencies, hertzes that were over what was allowed. And some awesome like internet sleuth did some great job of tracing down and finding a letter that shows, oh, you've been warned that you need to take down this immediately because you've been found to violate, thanks to one very observant citizen that said, oh, this person's violating. And it was like, okay, well, the tower that was registered wasn't even actually registered at all. But as far as I know, from what I could tell, there was just one of those letters fired off. Whether that means it came down or not, I don't know. But I do know from my father's work in electrical patents that and he was doing that through the 80s, like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I know from conversations with them, they were working on 12G as far back as 80s, early 90s.
12G?
12G,
as opposed
yes.
to 5G?
Yes, and if anybody wants to actually go to, you can't do it online. You have to actually go to the patent library. Most major cities have one. All you have to do is look it up, and you see that it's already been laid out.
How do they get from 5G to 12G without going to the ones in between? Because all that designates is a different generation of technology.
They don't, Gary. And that tells us how far ahead they are from what they're releasing now to what there really is.
Bingo. And my father's connection with the military, and the whole fact that the military put him in law school to write patents on this kind of stuff goes to show you.
So it begs a question. Who has real information and how do we get to it? Because obviously the political class is working with information that isn't correct as far as what they've presented to us to keep them as the political class. And so we've broken down to a point where individuals are run in a system that has no humanity to it. And so by working from human scale, how do we isolate or insulate ourselves from all these electric currents caused by the coaxial cable of society being wrapped around our necks like a noose.
I think we need to rely on healers, shaman healers.
I think I know who's got the answers. The Wizard of Oz, but we can't get there from here.
Well, we're off to see the wizard, and we've got Gandalf and Snoopy and a whole bunch of other characters. Heck, we're even going to bring Les Nesmith with us.
I'll give you guys a visual. I look like that wizard on that Gandalf's buddy, the guy with the rabbits. That's who I look like.
Radagast.
Yeah, that's a good example of what I look like, but my beard is white.
I think a white bearded men's society is definitely called for.
Ooh, I like that idea.
Amen.
So, how does what we're talking about today fit back into Tartaria, Miles?
I have no idea, Lenny, but I'll give it a try. This is interesting. This is the first thing that comes up in the mind instead of trying to figure that out. I'm working with that lately. What came to me the other day, because everyone knows as we enter into the age of Aquarius, it seems that Jupiter is vying for the position of Saturn in the scheme of things. And Saturn's been giving a hard time to Jupiter, and it all came to me when I realized the movie Whiplash, when it's seen, was about a professor, and this gets into Tartaria, Lenny, in the sense that timelines, when we understand, or what I'm coming to about timelines, because it was very, very difficult. The Mandela effect occurred, and it was found out in about 2015 what that really meant. And when you relate it to the whole Saturn Jupiter idea, the movie Whiplash is a crypto fiction of the story between Saturn and Jupiter's plight and fight. That's how I broke it down. And basically, the movie, and I'm going to have to give a spoiler kind of, but this is what it is. So, relating it to Tartaria, Whiplash is about a young man that enters into a very prestigious school, jazz band school, a music school. And he's a drummer, and he loves Buddy Rich, and he wants to carry the spirit of Buddy Rich and every great drummer and musician that he could possibly, come to. Well, the professor of the music laboratory said that he could become first chair because he just felt that he said, I think you could keep my time. Can you keep my time? And the kid said he kept wondering what in the world that was. So in the end, this movie represents the beautiful coming together that Saturn finally says, you've gone through every initiation that I've put you through. And now, Jupiter, we're going to rule together, but you can have your own time. Because Saturn is a time element, So basically what I'm saying is Tartaria is a absolutely flipped out kind of emergence of a timeline that existed somewhere that we didn't see until just now. So how could that be where we've been walking around these buildings for years and we bought the historical narrative of the powers that supposedly are, and now it's all coming, the blinders are being lifted at that level, and we're seeing not only a civilization that existed, but a whole way of living based on free energy, mutual cooperation, collaboration in the arts, and the sciences. It's just amazing. And so, how could that be without something really happening in a way that we, just as you say, it's almost like you can't explain, there's no explanation for the macro of things because it's so many variables, like Karen was saying, just about sociology. But we can explain the micro in a floating way. And that's the way I see Tartaria. It's just so beyond, we're entering into a kind of it's just like the surrealist movement and the Dada movement in the 20s, where they were all about the world is not what it seems. And they represented that in art and film. And Dali was a part of that, a lot of people. And those paintings and films and poems and everything, when we're talking about art, they were really realizing that something was about to happen. But that was a precursor in their art about how ridiculously amazing things can become when we enter into the imaginal. And I think that's what this all really is that the dream time that we're entering into, it's not a sleep dream. We're awaking in a dream of a bigger dreamer, or the mind of all minds. And Tartaria represents the optimal of what a civilization could become and what it was previously before the supposed mud flood, which represents kind of, to me, like in the Matrix, that the mud flood represents the scorched sky. And what lies beneath the ground is the real Zion, which might look like Tartaria. So that's very interesting, and that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think the emergence of a structure called Tartaria to be an optimal is coming outside of the borders of space-time as we know it from Einstein's imagination. But when Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge, he never dreamed that he would be deified as the figure of the all-knowing from a knowledge standpoint that involves, you're not allowed to use your imagination because we say this is so, it is so. And when you start looking at some of the novels I grew up on by people like Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Franz Kafka, that are true dystopian, search your life to figure out what you did wrong to deserve this hell type, it's funny how that imagery comes back in such a laughable manner in the flip side of what's going on now. And whereas Americans have been taught to demonize Russians because that's the game of the current time, we're playing George Orwell's 1984 out very well. And soon, instead of fighting Eurasia, we're going to be fighting Eurafrica. And the whole sides of who's good and who's bad are going to change. We have to drop the pretense and figure out a way that the individual is sovereign unto himself and works within a system that's supportive of the individual. And where I say we have to figure out a way, we have. That's what Tartaria is. And so figuring out the behaviors that we should hold as good citizens of the Tartarian Empire is a new way of formatting the structure for basic belief systems at the human level. And the change that we're seeking cannot come at the level that the problems were created. The problem is the death economy, because corporations never have had life in them. And the death economy has defeated the living world systems to the point where those systems are shutting down and withdrawing, and the death economy is getting its death. And that's a timeline that we don't have to be on because we've got new ways of doing things. Miles?
That's beautifully said, Lenny, because I was going to say the one thing that we haven't found out about Tartaria, and everybody's searching, is the idea of how a umbrella empire could function with all these nations, and what was the, I hate to say governmental structure because of the word, but what was the institutional structure of Tartaria and how was it run? And the only thing that came to me was I just sent something to Karen about Jean Liedloff's work. Uh, and she wrote the book, The Continuum Concept, where she went to a tribe in the Amazon called the Awana. And they were, quote, quote, Stone Age tribe that she went down there by accident, first of all. And she started just looking at how they structured their lives on a daily basis. And what she thought was very strange was there was no real chief in the tribe.
Yeah.
There were certain roles, and the roles would be played out depending on the situation.
Right.
And but ultimately, the child rearing was what she saw was the most amazing thing. But ultimately, the whole way the child was raised was the way the whole village looked and operated. And it's an amazing concept. So I just sent that to Karen, but I just wanted to say that it's a possibility because I just had that amazing, I had a eureka moment that it's a possibility that the very Stone Age tribe that everybody thinks is not, they're way back in the world and blah, blah, blah. Their social structure is brilliant, and it
Right.
might pertain to Tartaria.
It does. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah. You know what's amazing is the frequency that we must be zoning in brainwaves or something, because I was just going to ask that question to you, Miles, and you answered it before I even questioned it. And I also studied some smaller groups in sociology that's similar to the tribe that you're talking about, that when left alone and not governed by, and I agree with you, Dr. Lenny, fuck society. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, my whole reason for studying it was like, because fuck society. Best way to beat it is to know. Well, that was the theory back uh, long ago at age 20 or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, whose group is working and who is functioning in peace and cooperation with each other? And that's beautiful what you said. I mean, the way that you support, or the community supports the child, not to give any reference to it takes a village to raise a child, please give me a break. But what I'm saying is that while I would love to be able to just
It takes a
cipher.
child to raise a village, babe.
Yeah. And you know what? And Dr. Lenny often says this. It's like, let the child be the teacher. And here's the thing, because if you want to ever learn something by humans, learn it from a child, because they tell it straight up. They haven't been programmed enough yet to really give it any other way than what's authentic and true to their worldview. Now, you may have to, expand on it a little bit, but the bottom line is we cannot, we live amongst one another. Just like every animal on this earth lives amongst other animals of this earth. We can't separate psychology and sociology. And I'm not saying that the society that has somehow become the forefront is, it sucks. They're assholes. It's a shitty stuff. But in talking in a new way, I think, it's important to not cipher those things out. It's more collaborative, it's more collective, and looking at everything and how every kind of interacts, the chemistry, the biology, the physics, the spirituality, the psychology. So it's like taking all of that into consideration. And when we actually embrace that, and I don't know that there's a way, because I see political science as like a very just unachievable thing. But if you work in smaller communities where that communities respect the boundaries and the turfs of the different communities, that beauty and peace and balance, it I'm not going to be
It
so
also
arrogant to say it is achieved, but I'd like to think it's achievable.
it gives you an opportunity to diffuse out a lot of roles amongst a lot of people so that people can play act the same role in different local circumstance, and we come to different decisions based on the circumstance of the role. So running 30, 60, even 90 times the same show with different motive is what it takes to learn the nuance of how to run a show. But it seems that there's a very, very simple explanation for why that tribe Undisturbed was able to pull it off for that so long. And that's because what they were doing worked. And so they had no reason to change. And so the longevity is just because their system works. And until they got imposed with a system that doesn't work for them, but works on a larger scale for inanimate objects called corporations, they were able to maintain. But the world changes and we respond to it. When we change, the world has no response. And that means we're not on human scale. Yes, ask a question.
Quick question to Miles. Did that tribe actually laws, or was there just a sense of duty to the larger community?
The only thing that I remember about any laws, if there was such a thing, was that there was a shaman. And when it came to anything extraordinary that was happening that they didn't seem to be able to control, and also the shaman's role seemed to stay as his role or her role. There were two of them, Curandira and a male shaman. They would go to the shamans and tell their story about what was going on, and then the shaman would come back to them and tell them this is what he saw in spirit. So then they would take that and somehow they would relate that to the situation in their environment, and then things would kind of be cool. But what I found interesting is just a certain practical things that the tribe she saw do that was astounding. And that was, I think I told this before, where they had to build a bridge because the water had risen. And so one half of the tribe was on one side of the river and the other half of the other. And it was a small river, and they were, putting bamboo and things across the river to walk across it. And it took all day long, and it was hard work, and everybody, and the whole group was involved, the children, everybody. And then once it was finished, the shaman came up to bless it, and uh, the whole thing just fell apart and went down the stream. And so she watched for any reaction, and everybody just stood there real silent for about a minute. And she was kind of astounded with that. And then all of a sudden, the shaman and everybody broke out in laughter.
Like that would ever happen. Oh my God. That is a beautiful story, and I don't mean to laugh, but I just can't imagine that. Like like any teamwork crap that I've done in like the healthcare system, fighting for policy changes. Oh my God. Something falls apart, it becomes like, I need to get greater control, and it becomes blame game. Oh, well, the reason it fell was because of your side of the river. I mean, that's amazing.
Well, well, there was no blame. There was absolutely no blame. And then they had just a party afterwards.
Yeah, when you go back into the I Ching, almost every different reading at some point reminds you no blame. And the whole game of blaming things on anything is one of releasing your own responsibility to things that happen. And so if you are in the no blame situation, what you can do is you can always look at what happened as an algorithm of what could be. And if you step back and you shrink the size or you expand the size of what's going on, there's always lessons to be learned in the things that don't work. And we've gotten so used to things working exactly how they're supposed to work that we get into routines that become shackles on our minds because the routine allows us to sink into certain patterns. But sometimes the routine is such that the patterns we choose are consciously made. And I think that's where the real difference is that at human scale, changing our consciousness is focusing on things that make a difference. Since the one commonality that all life has is water, I think that we should basically honor the water, try and get it as clean as possible in all respects, and that will enhance the ability of everybody in the world to think clearer. But the understanding of water that we have as a scientific community is pretty much not correct. And we know it's not correct. And the asshats in charge have made it so that doctrine says you must be not correct to progress in science. And so we've got a gap in what science has become, and it's not going to change in this mindset. What we really need is a renewed renaissance. And if we can take the mindset that Tartaria is our means of converting back to a renaissance where we appreciate the ability of life to be abundant, and we take a wise use frame of reference to everything and don't use anything until we've figured out why it's there, how it comes about, and all those questions that people used to ask but don't anymore. One of the things I've been doing is going outside and relearning which plants are edible and which plants are not edible, just so I can reinforce in my mind that the ability to graze out in nature. And I've got it down to where I don't really need to grow food because I can graze on the food produced from the earth around here. But it does mean growing food because we are at a size of scale where there's a lot more than me as an individual that has to be taken care of. But if each of us take the responsibility for me as an individual and get their own house in order, 2-3 years from now, when Tartaria is the dominant system, you'll see exactly why we don't need people in the leadership positions. It's because we know who's the person to go to make the decisions to get things right. And they're busy teaching other people the logic, how to make those decisions. But going back as professions and taking whatever it is you do and questioning what you were taught, and then crossing to somebody in a different field and start correlating how things are the same and how things are different, that's going to be where we make advantage to really moving along in a way that amplifies our ability to work together. Now, before things get away, Dennis, are you in a place where you can mic on? If not, I understand completely. There you go.
Sorry, Lenny. Yeah, can you hear me without the back? There's quite a lot of background noise, but I can talk.
I can hear you well enough to say welcome back. Can you give us a brief update on your last month of being a working stiff?
Oh, the work started out pretty good, and then I kind of hit a block on earning money because I've got a history with the company, so the history keeps coming up and getting in the way, just in my head, basically. So I keep having these thoughts about how crap they are based on my previous experience of them.
Yeah.
That's kind of what's getting in the way, but I'm working through it a bit at a time. So every time a thought comes up, I have to question it, basically. I have to question, like, it was my perspective at the time, but was that what actually happened?
Yes.
So it's going all right. It's going all right.
Good. It's nice to see you and hear your voice again.
Now, I've been experimenting with screen recording. Because I've got 2 Android phones now, so I can play the radio and record this on one and record the screen and the audio on the other one. And I don't know whether it's going to work properly, but it seems like it might. Or it might end up just being a screen recording with my commentary over the top of it. Something, I don't know. I'll work something out anyway.
Good. I'd be very interested in what you come up with. It's entirely amazing how we can each take our own individual adventures and then hook back up into this new timeline and share it with people all over the world.
Yeah, it's good because there's a lot of like very disparate points of view, and like the more points of view you get on something, the more likely you are to see the truth of it, I think.
Yeah, I think that we're in a state where the relative truth and the absolute truth have deviated from each other, that there's a truthful truth and an imaginary truth, and it might almost be frequency dependent on where your truth lies.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. I think from the center, you kind of get the whole thing, but from anywhere around the circumference, you're only going to get a partial viewpoint. So that kind of makes sense.
I find it interesting that conceptually, recently, I've taken the center of a ball to be the down position and the radius of the ball to be the up position. And now my perspective of down and up has changed. And I'm really, if we redefine our concepts in terms of other things, we can see how much the use of language persuades us to keep the situation going as is and not try and change things, because change is uncomfortable. But if we don't get some fundamental change, things are going to release energy in a odd manner.
Yeah, I'm just kind of playing with reversing things. So I've had no money for a long time, and now I've got a potential to have some money. So I'm coming up against all of my blocks a little bit at a time. So it's interesting that I've ended up reversing the whole thing. So I'm going towards the money rather than away from it now.
Well, I hope to follow in your path in the near future. Having you had cut it, maybe I can do some trimming and widen it so that people have a route in which they can quantum jump.
Yeah, we'll see. It's all experimental at the moment, but I'm doing all right with it. I think I've got a kind of day-to-day experimental process going on.
Okay. Well, we're very interested, and I've been talking to the folks behind the scene at Steampunk Radio. So if you're interested in being an on-air broadcaster on Steampunk, we'll talk sometime down the road, because there may be a restructuring of arrangements that allow us to have a lot more people who can log in and operate the system. It's a matter of buy-in.
Right, that's fair. Yeah, I can potentially do something on the weekend. I can't do much during the week at the moment, though.
No, I understand that. And I'm only talking about maybe an hour a week at your convenience, not necessarily a fixed time, but that depends on a lot of other people because I have no idea who will end up being the station manager.
Right, that's fair. I'll just play it by ear anyway. We'll see what happens.
Yes. Thanks for coming by. It was great to catch up with you, and I'm glad our listeners had the chance. Dennis was a regular feature of Wednesdays with our word association games, and we got into some very, very good shows with some of the words we were led down the road to. This has been a very good show. I see that it's within the last 10 minutes, so I might as well remind everybody this is The New Way on Steampunk Radio with 2 E's, which you can get on your TuneIn app, or if you're listening to Disintegral's Cloud Therapy YouTube live stream, you're currently listening to the show, or you might be listening to this on a future podcast, because at some point we're going to go and take all these shows that we've made and put them into places where you can get to. So the New Way is a collective organization of individuals, each cutting a new path, but now we're starting to come more at it like the coaxial cable that Double Nuts was describing. And in reality, every metaphor that we can see exists, we can make happen in a fractal reality. And the way I see reality being is that there are infinite number of selves, but you are only conscious in the mind in which you are currently at, and that's a frequency. And as you shift frequencies, you come into spheres of influence that are based on a morphogenic field. And so the morphogenic field that has been called human has been opened to an expansion, probably based on Fibonacci. And so things that we had learned that always were are now 50% self-similar, but differentiated over 12,900, 13,000 years, because it takes that long to get from the end of one transition to the midpoint of the next transition. 26,000 years is a huge cycle. And so if you take how far it is away from the cycle caused by one, you're up in the Fibonacci sequence a long way, but nowhere near the billions that you have before the doubling function takes over from the Fibonacci sequence as the limit of reality. But that has happened in the monetary system and the economic system, is that they have printed so much money that money can no longer work as a store of value. It's just too worthless. And so we have to come up with a different store of value that allows each individual to have their own value system. And opposite to what the Stones say, we have to be able to each always get what we want. And if you go back to the Stones song, you can't always get what you want, but if you try somehow, you get what you need. That's the whole key to the whole mindset, is that as long as you are thinking well and taking care of yourself, your mindset is to work in your own benefit. And we have been trained that our own benefit is selfish and greedy because the system we have had rewards selfish and greedy activity. And so we're at the point where we've blown it all up and there's nothing to land on except Tartaria. And so by role playing the Tartarians and understanding that we're not bound to the limits of the current society. And in fact, Tartarian behavior has to be developed from a philosophy from human scale, so that we have to, as individuals, each play the role of ourselves. And in playing the role of ourselves, who's better to be cast than us? And so every time we do stuff, we will imagine that on our scale, there are other people doing similar stuff, because there's no reason to think that our ideas are any more unique than any other individual's ideas. But because there are so many of us divided into different soul groups, we can mix and match from the perspective of soul groups and continually move to larger and larger scale universes with fewer and fewer people, but more and more soul connections. And so the depth, width, and breadth of where society has been has gone from a nice little cubic box into a forceful release of energy that can absolutely wipe out lower scales of life if it's not noticed and focused on and corrected. On the other hand, it has been noticed and focused on, and the correction is underway. And we see that correction as the Mandela effect, because the Mandela effect is shifting the past to meet the future that we're headed to by creating a mechanism to get there. And that means going back into past history and changing things. And in order to know what to change, we have to work through the crypto fiction of our times and create the scenarios that give us the possibility of fixing something in the past. And by coming up with that possibility, somebody can carry it back, transform it, and it happens here in real time. So we have to get the idea that past, present, and future are all currently in the now, and that you can be in any of the three and still in the now, and not insist that everybody's now is coincidental here on this particular planet Earth. It's not. But we happen to share resonance, so our reality is here on this Earth, and the Earth is expressed at different fractals that are governed by the size and scale that people are thinking on. So if you think on real small scale and take care of yourself, you are a larger individual than if you are thinking about global humanity and you're just a very small individual working from that perspective. But both perspectives are complementary. And if you're looking at a ball of any size, you're looking at a 180-degree image of the ball, and you assume that the back 180 degrees that you don't see is the same as the front 180 degrees. But you know, football has a little stripe called laces that the quarterback can put his fingers on so that he can throw the ball, and a football is not a symmetric ball like other balls. So there we go. We've just lost the signal for the radio station, which must mean we're over. But that was a nice little run. I think we have done very well. Thank you very much for the attendance here today. It was a fun show.